Artificial intelligence is remaking marketing as we speak, and if you're a marketer, you can either get up to speed or get left behind. The choice is yours, and really, it's a no-brainer. Join Geoff Livingston and Greg Verdino as they explore the latest AI news, trends, tools, and ideas that are creating the future of marketing today. This is No Brainer, an AI podcast for marketers. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, yes, I am an AI. Take it away, Geoff and Greg.
Hey, this is Greg Verdino. Welcome to No Brainer, and I am here as always with Geoff Livingston. What's going on, my man?
Hey.
Hey.
I got my emo Jimmy Butler wig on the side over here.
I should be so lucky as to have any kind of hair. I mean, you too, of course, but you get away with it. If they can't see you, then they can assume that you are in fact a fine coiffed friend. And it's October. It's October, and I thought we would be talking about the nice, chilly, fall-like weather, but I don't know what it is down there in D.C., Geoff, but it is like 80 degrees.
Yeah, it's kind of steamy here in D.C., a little bit 80 plus, got that swamp humidity kicking back in.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. Always the swamp down there. Gotta clean the swamp. So we have an interesting show for everybody this week. I think for the last couple of episodes, maybe last few episodes, we've kind of gone high and wide, really, and we've spoken about big picture trends, whether it was regulation or barriers to AI adoption. I know we've done shows on responsible AI, ethics, things like that. This time we're actually going to go, I think, down a bit into the weeds. And of course we will have some overarching themes, and we'll talk about this from a broader perspective, but we really want to look at some of the news that's been breaking over the course of the past couple of weeks since our last episode. And there has been a lot, right?
It's been insane.
We've seen an
as it always is, though, right?
Right, absolutely. So we, certainly announcements about OpenAI's multimodal ChatGPT, right? That's GPT-4V, their multimodal model, and the probability, inkling perhaps that this is starting to roll out as we're starting to see some people use it. There have been a bunch of meta announcements, which I think are kind of interesting because they're kind of taking things in a different direction, at least in terms of the announcements they've made with some consumerized applications. And I believe they're kind of bridging AI with their metaverse vision, if for no other reason than to make Zuckerberg look a little bit less stupid than he might have for changing the name of the company to Meta and going all in on metaverse when that was the hot thing. We saw Amazon announce an investment into Anthropic. I think it's somewhere between $1 and $4 billion in cash. So they are certainly making a fairly big play to kind of lock up a relationship with, one of the more viable ChatGPT competitors.
Very good one. Yeah, Claude's very good.
Absolutely. Google's promised once again that they've got their big AI platform that's going to go head-to-head with GPT-4 and ChatGPT. And if you remember, Geoff, was it several months ago, 6 months ago, perhaps, there was a French AI company called Mistral that had raised a shocking, $100
million, right? Yeah.
Seed round. And I think the story then was essentially a 3-person company with no product had raised this $100 million seed, and they've just released their first model to the market, good, bad, or otherwise. So there's lots and lots of stuff happening in the news cycle. The interesting thing, and this is where we're going to talk about all of those, but I think where we kind of give our spin on it for everybody, so we kind of let everyone know where we're going, where we give our spin on it is, as you know, we've been through this before, right? We've been through it with the original .com days. We've been through it with the social media hype in the early 20...
Web 2.0.
Right, Web 2.0 stuff. And certainly we've seen the stuff that's kind of sort of fired and fizzled, like Metaverse, like Web 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where, you start to see a pattern where the narrative drives the market, not the other way around, where media is repeating what the big tech players are telling them to repeat and not actually reporting on what's actually going on. And I think that creates a very interesting market dynamic, and we're going to get into that as we talk about these news stories. Before we dive in, I want to remind everybody, as always, if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, whatever they're calling iTunes these days, Apple Podcasts. We're so old. iTunes. That's like 1997.
Do you have an iPod? Do you have an iPod Touch?
Not an iPod Nano. But if you are listening,
I have one
to
of
us,
those.
so did I.
I still have one.
Oh my God. But anyway, if you're listening to us on your iPod Nano right now, or on really any of the pod services that you enjoy, please be sure to subscribe, to rate, to review, to like, to do whatever you can do on your chosen pod service. And if you're watching us on YouTube, of course, subscribe to the channel. Be sure to smash that like button and leave us comments if you have anything to say, good, bad, dirty, or otherwise. As you know, if you know other marketers who might be interested in artificial intelligence, please be sure to have them check us out. And if you are a marketer who is interested in anything other than artificial intelligence, we'd of course encourage you to check out our friends on the Marketing Podcast Network as well. 50 plus podcasts, great content by marketers for marketers, and we appreciate their support and the support of all the Marketing Podcast Network advertisers. So with all of that lengthy and somewhat disjumbled preamble, Geoff, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, 100%. So I think everybody that listens to this podcast, almost everybody, is a marketer. So one thing that marketers love is being marketed to, and we also tend to enjoy breaking it down. And I think what we're really doing today is taking that step back and looking at this hype cycle and analyzing how companies, most notably OpenAI, but how companies like OpenAI, like Anthropic, like Amazon, Microsoft, all the bazillion little startups that are popping up, Hey Jen, all those guys, how they're marketing effectively using this incredible AI hype cycle that's really blown up over the past year. And as you had noted, I mean, what we see are media that's basically parroting these messages. We're also seeing influencers do that, right? Where they basically shoot out everything that's said. They may add a little bit of a shine on it, but it's really nothing substantive. In some cases, they're just parroting. And these are supposed authorities and, again, influencers. And I think, I have to be measured in the way I say this, Greg, but these personal brands often build themselves out to be really subject matter experts when what they really tend to do is just amplify, right? They're amplification mechanisms. And very few of them are brutal and honest and get down to brass tacks. And I think what's ended up happening is now we have this full-blown hype cycle, which I think you and I discussed a couple of episodes ago with Gartner announcing that we were at the peak for generative AI. And, we certainly are. I don't know if we've peaked, though. I definitely have been hearing much more of a consensus that we are in a hype cycle, that we may actually have a bubble brewing in some ways. And once you start hearing that, then there's all this conjecture about when it ends. Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be 2 years? We don't know. We've seen this. This particular news cycle seems to be unusually aggressive. And what I mean by that is it's faster than what you and I saw during the .com era and during even the Web 2.0 era. And I think that's also a function of the media environment. If you looked at the media environment during the .com era, you had Upside and Wired. What was that? Red Herring, right? All those publications. You had Ziff Davis had a couple of publications, all that stuff. Interactive Week, that kind of a thing. And so you were really working off a weekly trade cycle, and the trades would blow up these stories, and then parent media would pick up those stories. And sometimes it came top down when it was a bigger company, or it'd be bottom up. And ironically, the OpenAI of that era had to have been Amazon, right? Like that was the one where everybody's like, oh, they're full of shit. They'll never make money. Sorry, Lisa. And we got that out of the way early. But the whole thing is that may not be what's happening here. And this news cycle has some different flavors to it. If you look at that .com, and I'll boot it over to you as soon as I get through 2.0, just for your feelings on this.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, you also had the industry analysts during that .com era. So Forrester, Gartner, IDG or IDC or both of them. Everybody, remember the Yankee Group, all those guys. They were bought, right? All these technology companies had money in there, and these guys would basically parrot out what they would say. So you had the media parroting, and you had like who's supposed true trusted third parties parroting. And that created a massive bubble, and it actually created a fiscal recession. Move forward about 7 years, from 2001 to 2008, and we're in the middle of another boom, the 2.0 boom, which saw Twitter, Facebook, commenting, blogging, all that stuff. And you really had a war between traditional media and bloggers. And I think that they actually worked well during that news cycle because the media was losing power and bloggers were calling bullshit on the media. So there was one point of view, which was the mainstream point of view, and then there was the trenches point of view. And that actually seemed to generate a lot of good news stories. I think that there was a healthy failure rate for some of these startups, like some of these social networks that came late, like Pounce and other ones. That one seemed to work out okay. This one feels like the first one, except that the news cycle is daily because of social networks, right? Like the social networks are basically driving these stories, and they have like a 3-hour to 24-hour, maybe if they're lucky, really big, they actually may make it into trade pubs. So this news cycle is very fast, it's dominant, and that's why you see companies like OpenAI churning out multiple massive news stories or manufacturing news stories every week. It's similar, though, to .com in the sense that you have no point of reason holding these companies in balance. I would even say that the industry analysts seem to be in the same position, although they're bought by larger big tech rather than small tech. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I think all of that makes a lot of sense, and I kind of see and feel the same things you're describing, and, we've lived through those same hype cycles and troughs of disillusionment and the bubble and the pop and all that stuff. I think there's probably, in my mind, a few things going on here as well, in addition to everything you've mentioned, including the always-on news cycle, and I saw this with Web3 and with Metaverse, and we absolutely saw it even back in the days of Web 2.0, but certainly with Web3 and Metaverse, the two most recent hype cycles, is this idea that whether it's the media or the influencers or the advocates or the analysts, whomever, have taken a position of preaching to the converted. And if you are not converted, it's almost like they dismiss you out of hand and say, well, no, you just don't get it. The reason you're not making millions in NFTs is because you don't get it. And we're not going to waste our time with you because we're the future. And I feel like there's some of that vibe going on here with AI. There are, as you know, many, 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 many daily newsletters. And, some of them are quite good in terms of putting stuff on my radar screen, right? Just seeing, I didn't realize this happened or that happened, but there is scant analysis in most of them. It's basically a sort of running tally of all the cool things that happened this week with lots of exclamation points and like emoji cat faces and stuff, right? And there's not really any analysis that's
no analysis,
right? Like, here's 5 writing assistants that launched this week, and you're like, did the world need 5 more writing assistants? And
yeah, I think my favorite one of these stories, and it's a funny story, so forgive me because you know me, I always tell bad jokes, but it was these 9 functions that are going to be completely replaced by AI bots, and this guy listed Grammarly Go as the thing that's going to kill the proofreader position, and he had typos in it, and it was just like, oh, come on, man, like who can take you seriously,
Right.
All right, sorry.
But that's the state of the state, right? So I think there is that, that sort of, that sort of preaching to the converted as opposed to trying to convert the unconverted, which I think would require people to take a more critical, independent, impartial look at what's happening. The second thing is that, I believe it, there's that website, there's an AI for that.com that kind of keeps a running tally database and sort of a little bit of profile or kind of, factoids about all of the different AI platforms and tools that are on the market. And I believe there are 8,000 plus tools listed on this website. And that's probably not even comprehensive. So, right, so you've got 8,000 plus tools. I heard something like there's like 1,000 new tools being added every week or every month, whatever it is, it's too many. And, so there's a lot of companies out there, or a lot of tools. I don't even know if I would call them all companies. And here's the thing, the vast majority of them are skinned foundation models, right? It's something that's sitting on top of GPT-4 or Llama or whatever, which is not a bad approach, right? Not everybody needs to be building their own large language model, but I think the advantage you would have had 24 months ago if you were building on top of GPT-3 at the time is very different from the kind of advantage you have today when everybody and their mother have access to that same large language model through the API.
So it's so funny that we're talking about this because I literally have one hit my inbox from a very well-known influencer within our space or influential organization that says, "This week in AI, ChatGPT gets superpowers with an arm boom." And we'll talk about that, not the story, but that particular general story.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Sorry about that.
But in this, in terms of this, with I think, these are very thin offerings, really, and it's very difficult to differentiate these offerings. It's too easy to launch, too difficult to differentiate in the marketplace. So I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that a lot of these organizations that are launching new product kind of have to hit the hype cycle now as hard as they can because, and I'm not talking about the OpenAIs and Microsofts and Googles, those are a different category, but it's the 100 other guys that are all hitting the hype cycle really hard right now because tomorrow they may be gone. And, I feel like it almost feels like we pick on Jasper a lot, and I'm not picking on them. I promise I'm not picking on them, but they're a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where 24 months ago, what Jasper was doing was really unique. And you can still argue that a lot of what they've laid on top of OpenAI's models is unique and compelling and differentiated in terms of the way they're trying to manage the entire marketing campaign cycle. But at the end of the day, it's far less differentiated than it would have been a couple of years ago because everyone has access to the same model. And that's why you're seeing them lower expectations, bring in a new CEO, right? We're starting to see even the more established players in the market start to struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
And rightly so.
Right, and I think even that is going to result in an uptick in the hype and an uptick in the boosters going, yeah, they can make it, they can make it, they can make it. Less critical coverage.
Yeah, a few riff points off of what you just said. I think one, what you're talking about with these people that are preaching to the choir, it almost feels to me like, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, it feels to me like we're dealing with people trying to make themselves influential, right? Like it seems like that kind of a game where we've seen that on Instagram, we've seen that in all the other markets. This is just the new market. And so you see this kind of like Wild West place where people are just, I want to be known for this. I want to be known for this rather than offering value. And one of the things that I've been really, really hard on myself about when I talk about AI is this valuable to marketing people? Does this actually add anything? Because if it doesn't, then I'm going to shut up and not say it. And it's like, I don't know if we see that kind of filter coming from people right now. The other thing that really came to mind too, when you were talking, was with these vapid startups, shall we call them? I'm starting to talk to folks about investment through our own crazy journey, and we'll see where we land too. But one of the things that I'm noticing is that there's a lot of skepticism now for any kind of a startup that has some sort of a shrink wrap on top of GPT or Llama or Anthropic's Claude, whatever it might be, whatever LLM that you're basically kicking back out as your own with a unique little spin on it, like, hey, we're the legal GPT. That's not going to really go far. It's not going to get a lot of funding, and I think people are going to start getting very bored with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hearing about that same kind of thing. And even while they're not seeking funding, Jasper is part of that story as well, right?
Sure, they're a GPT player.
Expectations, they're a GPT wrapper. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's what I mean, that these startups are... it's almost too easy to launch an AI startup today because of the general availability of these large language models.
And to the Jasper point, one of the reasons that Writer was such an interesting story a couple of weeks ago, we didn't talk about it because we tried not to talk about the daily news, but Writer's $100 million, they've developed their own technology, right? Like that's their LLM.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I agree with that point. And I also agree. I don't think I need to comment it on even, but I agree with your point about influence. I do think that there are, we might have been those guys a decade ago, 2 decades
People could probably
ago,
say we're those guys now. I don't know.
But I think you're absolutely right that there are people who want to be famous for being, known for being an early AI thought leader, adopter, whatever, and there's not as much of an emphasis on being a critical voice. I don't mean critical as in negative, but critical as in critical thinking, right?
Yeah, boy, if we were going to have a real navel-gazing moment like true influencers, we could figure out and position ourselves. But I think everybody knows we're the crusty old guys on the lawn, like, get off my lawn.
Right.
But
you managed to get through an episode without lots of ums and ahs and
bald reference again.
Which I suppose we should get into some of the news stories we said we were going to get in. So let's.
I wanted to throw a filter out there. So, let me see what you think about this. And we're kind of riffing a little bit today, folks, because we're bored of reading the news every day. We see it, we talk about it. So we wanted to add a little flavor to this today. We want to use these stories to illustrate our points that we just made. So the big stories that came out, which everybody's just like, oh my God, ChatGPT is the Wizard of Oz. But more like how to discern whether or not an announcement is of real interest to you, or to me as a marketer, right? Like this is my personal filter that I'm sharing, which is this available to me now? Is it deployed? Is it actually realistic? Or is it just some hey, in the future, a futurist type of statement? Because a lot of these announcements are actually bullshit where there's nothing that's available and there's nothing that's really being developed or it's long-term roadmap. And to me, that is just hey, that's okay. I think it's okay for companies to say hey, this is what our vision is, but to announce it as a product is another thing, right? That's why you see auto manufacturers deploy concept vehicles, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
When I kind of going back to the .com days, I don't remember as many sort of future promise press releases at that point in time. I felt like companies were more likely to keep their roadmap a bit closer to the vest. But there were a lot of partnership announcement press releases. And I don't know if this was a common phrase or not a common phrase.
Channels.
But they used to, channels, absolutely. But a PR person that I worked with at one of the companies, one of the .com companies I was at, used to call these press releases Barneys. Because it was basically one company says, I love you. The other company says, I love you back. It's like that Barney, I love you, you love me kind of announcement. And nothing ever came of any of these partnerships. It was just two big companies who had some spotlight shining each other's lights on the other to give both companies more press coverage and more hype. And nothing ever happened. And he used to always call these like "I love you, I love me" kinds of press releases Barneys, and it's almost like a lot of these roadmap releases are the new Barney for the AI age.
What does an AI breakup look like? Do you call it a Dear John?
I
Dear
guess
John,
so.
here I'm prompting you. Decouple. Sorry.
I am unprompting you. I'm clearing my context. All right. So, of course, as we've spoken about in many, many, many episodes, and we're on what, 15 or 16 now?
16.
16. Probably in each one of our 15 prior episodes, we've, of course, made the point in one way or another that OpenAI themselves, not only did they set off the entire hype cycle, but are themselves the masters of sustained hype. Anything that they say or do, they just suck the air out of the entire room.
Oh my God,
and
it's just amazing.
Everyone who's writing about AI is writing about OpenAI. So
they will be writing textbook chapters about OpenAI in 10 years. Mark my words. Oh, actually, they'll just deploy OpenAI to write it about itself.
they'll be asking OpenAI about OpenAI. So anyway, their big announcement this week, which we already, of course, teased in the opening and we've spoken about a little bit, is their announcement that ChatGPT would now become truly multimodal. They've kind of hyped it as ChatGPT can now see, hear, and speak. So you can speak to it and it will, quote unquote, speak back to you. Of course, that's just text to speech. It's not actually having a conversation with you. It can take image inputs and interpret those images. It can output images and so on and so forth. This is the promise. Now, if this sounds at all familiar, as it may, Geoff, they announced this
spring, right?
Months ago, right?
Oh my God.
This is the second time they've announced it, which makes it even more interesting because it's the second wave of breathless hype that they've had around the exact same announcement. The difference
so
here,
full of shit.
Right? The difference here is that this is available. This functionality is in fact available now to some select number of users.
That are only in the United States,
Right.
not globally.
Exactly. Only in the United States, only for Plus and Enterprise. And if you're thinking, well, look, I'm paying my $20 for Plus and I don't have these features, you are probably correct because I don't have the features either.
Neither do I, but I pay.
So they are rolling this
Hey, but we're influencers. Where's our version?
So they're dribbling it out sort of drop by drop. And I know
Right.
there is validity to a phased rollout of features or functionality, but the nature of the hype of now available clearly is not paying off in terms of the reality for most users.
And like literally, we're seeing people within our own vertical calling it AI superpowers when it's not. And frankly, even the functionality that you're talking about. Okay, so you've added Siri or what's the Microsoft version of that called? Corsa, the one that nobody cares about.
Yeah,
Cora,
something like that.
Cantera, I don't know. Whatever. The failed Microsoft conversational bot. Cortana. You've taken Cortana and DALL-E and mashed it up with GPT. Wow.
Yeah,
That's great.
right.
So you've basically shrunk wrap your own product with Microsoft's product, your biggest investor. I mean, it's probably that's a huge oversimplification, but it's not a massive leap forward. This isn't something that's actually very functional. It's not very pragmatic yet. It's not very useful yet. It's not truly multimodal yet, where it thinks like that. It just basically, anybody that's used a ChatGPT plugin knows, it basically channels it from one app to the other because, this belongs in the picture app. This is the voice app. Right.
You enter your text prompt into ChatGPT. It tunnels over to DALL-E, basically does what DALL-E has always done, comes back to ChatGPT, sticks it on your screen, right? or text to voice, voice to text. It basically runs it through natural language processing, converts it back. Is this cool? Sure. Is it as revolutionary as the sort of pundits and fanboys and influencers and analysts are playing it out to be?
No way, man. No way.
Right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow, right? I fully believe that at some point in the future, voice will be the dominant interface with machines.
Bye prompt engineering.
But we're not there now, right?
Sort of.
And it's being. I think these sort of feature releases are being promoted as if it's this paradigm shift, when in fact it's almost just another parlor trick in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
and it's not quite what what's being promised.
That's a great descriptor, the parlor trick, because I feel like 90% of this, I mean, some of it is that it's starting to roll out amongst test users, right? And some of it's only on the mobile app, by the way, right? Like the voice stuff. But here's the thing. They know Google's coming out with Gemini. And this, I feel like, is driven by Gemini. Like, they want to be seen as the leader. We know that OpenAI's strategy is to be front runner. That's all we want to be. We want to be first. Everybody comes to us. And this Google Gemini announcement, which is, folks, that if you don't know what multimodal AI is, you're probably maybe the next generation or the same generation as Greg and I, then just think multimedia, because that's basically what the AI does. It transcends media to compute across different types. So video, visual, text, audio. And that's just the natural evolution of the internet. It always has worked that way. You go from one channel to multi-channel. But for AI to be able to process like that is really awesome. It's a big step forward. And I think that Gemini has this kind of like storm cloud looming over the league. It's almost like for NBA fans, if you remember Wembanyama's draft this past spring, like this big, huge French player coming in that's supposed to be a generational talent like LeBron James. That's how Gemini is starting to get talked about within AI circles. People see it as the next thing coming. And it really may be the moment when Google starts to compete effectively with OpenAI. And so I see this as an initial countermeasure. And we also know that GPT-4V is coming out, and that's OpenAI's version of it. And now they're they're releasing research that their parent company has done on GPT-4V about how amazing it is. And I do feel like it's almost like a counter campaign to Google's Whisper campaign, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were talking about that, the other thing, you're talking about Google Gemini, and it just occurred to me, so much of the narrative, and of course this is, I'm sure, been largely driven by OpenAI's own PR department and strategy, right? A lot of the narrative has been game over. It's like it's day zero, and people are like, game over, OpenAI's the winner. It's like we are so early, and you start to hear things now like Gemini and sort of the, again, PR, hype, but the sort of the advanced kind of rumor mill spinning around Gemini and what that might be and how much of a challenger to OpenAI it could be. Where 3 months ago people were counting Google out of the race. I mean, come on, Google.
Like, really?
Right?
Because they've kicked a lot of people out of different verticals.
Right. And, and Amazon is, kind of playing a little bit kind of
coy,
more conservative, a little quieter, but they're still making big moves, right? And Facebook has, I think, in some ways, a very different strategy to go
recycle metaverse shit.
Well, metaverse, if we get into their announcements, a lot of their stuff is very much consumer oriented.
Sure, makes sense for their own networks.
Which makes sense. Like, nobody says everybody in the generative AI space has to be playing for productivity, right? There are a
Right.
lot of applications for these things. And then I read something recently that that Apple, who everyone's like, what the hell's Apple doing, has actually invested more in the acquisition or investment in AI companies than any of the other guys. So,
So
so there's a lot going on that we've yet to see in a game that's still very much in the first minutes.
and Google and Amazon clearly are focused on the enterprise, right? Where I feel like OpenAI doesn't know what it's focused on. Like
Right.
they have a clear PR strategy. I don't know if they have a clear product strategy.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I saw something. I'm sure many people have seen it, but Sequoia did their latest kind of take on the state of the state, and I shared it on LinkedIn, and I made the point like I'm always a little bit skeptical when a venture capital firm that has money in companies in a given market is hyping that market because of course they've got
They have a vested interest,
every
right?
vested interest in doing so. But one of the things that I noted is they did sort of a Lumascape kind of chart of the generative AI market, and I felt like almost like vicariously proud of whoever put that together because they put ChatGPT under prosumer, not in their enterprise chart. And
I
I'm
think
like,
that's right.
yes, it's like that's exactly where it belongs. Like it's especially when you think about like the paid version or whatever, it maybe isn't consumer in the same way character AI is, or the way the sort of Snoop Dogg chatbot that Facebook is introducing is. But it certainly is
Did,
not enterprise.
did we
And
learn this lesson already, Meta, with like the whole Samuel L. Jackson thing on Echo? With that in mind, Greg, so what do you think? OpenAI, hype or no hype? Is it real? Should people care? Those announcements last week.
So I would say it is more hype than reality, given the way it's rolling out, who it will be available to, which incidentally we did not point out. It ain't going to be nobody for any time soon. It ain't going to be nobody that's on the freebie version,
No freebie peoples.
which is the vast majority of their users. So I think it is mostly hype. I agree with your assessment that it is probably a pre-fensive maneuver, trademark, to get ahead of some of the big announcements that may be coming out of Google and some of the others.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, unless you're like an Uber AI developer that really cares about how multimodal is going to impact your apps, you're probably a little less excited about this because really it's not going to affect your day-to-day operations for at least a couple months. But keep your eye on it. What about Mistral? You want to move on?
Yeah, let's move on to them. So, is that what we're up to next, Mistral?
Mistral.
So I have no idea how to say it. It's French. I know that the founders look a little bit like a boy band, and I know that, as we said earlier, they raised a shocking $100 million seed round. Remember when seed rounds used to be like 5,000, 20,000, 100,000? These guys raised $100 million. They have pedigree. They come out of DeepMind and some of the other organizations. I believe Facebook as well. So they have pedigree. They've been working in the land of LLMs for a long time. They certainly have deep generative AI or even just general AI cred. But anyway, so they had raised that massive round. And just this week, they released their first model, which I think it's called like something like Mistral 7B or something like that. So I don't know where like 1 through 7A went, but this is their first model. They are committed to open source, so this is an open source model. So it's closer in style to Facebook's Llama than it is to something like a GPT-4, right? In that it's not a proprietary closed model. But they're also doing something else interesting, and there's some good and there's some bad. Because I've been like reading some of the press, and actually this is a case where actually there has been some critical press. So they've released it essentially on a torrent, just like it's 1996, and their new single's about to drop. But they released it on a torrent. Essentially anybody can pull it down off the torrent. They can host it on a node node and kind of let others download it off of
They
their
just
node.
dumped it, basically.
Right? Yeah, they just dumped it out there. And people are starting to use it or starting to propagate it across the network or starting to make it available, from multiple nodes on that network. And it is freely available to use for whatever you wish. Now, that's an interesting model, of course. I'm sure it's going to get them a lot of scale very quickly. There's certainly been a lot of buzz and hype around it. Now, the other thing I've seen, though, is that the model itself has fewer guardrails than virtually any other model on the market. And to some users that might be good, and that may in fact be a philosophy of the company. I don't know, to say let's make it free and open. But I'm starting to see some people write articles about how you can ask it the best way to kill your wife, and it'll tell you. And that it actually has very few limitations, so it can go really dark, really racist, really inappropriate, really quickly. Now, what's interesting is because it's on a torrent, and it's been replicated, it basically can never be deleted now. You'd have to get everybody who's pulled down a version from the torrent to delete it. So they can't even pull back the model, retool it, tighten the guardrails, and re-release it. So as good, bad, or otherwise as this model may be, it's out there in the world. And it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up and how people start to use it and whether there are going to be more malicious actors who use it or whatever. But it is available today.
Yeah. So I think, they passed the hype cycle sniff. They declared we're here, right? They also, when they put this out, they put out that statement, we have a lot more coming this fall. Very nebulously. They didn't say what?
Yeah.
And I kind of like that too, because these guys have some swagger, right? They're like, here's some shit for you. Pardon my French. Here's some algorithm for you. You play with that. We got more coming. And for a company that raised as much as they did, as quickly as they did, for them to turn around in 3 months and then just do this, I think they're really kind of serving the market notice. But they're doing so with walk. We're walking, okay? We're showing you what we're going to do. And you better be ready. And so I kind of like it. I don't care about this product. It doesn't affect me
I don't.
or the marketing world.
Right. I'm not building stuff on top of models the way
it's a developer only thing, right?
It is a developer thing. I think the other thing that they've done, which is interesting, is like all of them, they do performance tests, right? And they say we're better than this, we're worse than that, kind of, and I feel like what I've seen on that front is they very clearly position themselves as a better open source model than the other dominant open source model, which is Llama.
Yeah.
They basically head-to-head tested the model against Llama and find, according to their data, that it performs better than Llama.
We'll see. We'll see.
But they're not trying to say it's as good as GPT-4. Because still GPT-4 is kind of, for performance,
it's the gold standard right now. I mean, I think you could argue Anthropic kind of sits between 3.5 turbo and 4, but
so I think even there, it's like an honest performance test in some ways. Maybe it's not fully honest and they're not as good as or better than Llama, but certainly they're not trying to overpromise. So I think, again, for all those reasons, sort of a legitimate, got to pay attention to it for the right kind of user, the developer, release of a working model that performs reasonably well. I think, without overpromising how well it performs and without getting too much into, and tomorrow here's the 75 features you're going to get.
Yeah.
I think they've done a reasonably decent job of playing into the hype cycle for sure, and capturing some value out of that hype cycle without being overly BS-y.
No, actually, I think that they kind of scared a couple of people. They're competitors. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next one. I think we both like that one. Amazon's strategic not $4 billion investment in Anthropic. So why I did that one was because not everybody, most organizations, even the venerable CNBC, but also the many, many, many AI pundits said, hey, Amazon just invested $4 billion. They're here, just like Microsoft and Google, right? They're doing the same thing as Microsoft. Actually, it probably will be close to $4 billion, but it wasn't to start. What it was a $1 billion strategic investment with options for more. And I think that that's kind of probably related around equity because Amazon also got a minority stake. Amazon will not have a place on their board or their strategic direction. But it sounds like if Anthropic feels it needs more cash, it can trade in more equity for that. And that's a game that I bet if I'm the Anthropic investment group and the original founders, I don't want that cash. I want to keep that cash away from me as long as possible. Or if I use it, I want to be very, very slow and intentional about it and try to raise as much money as I can through my own means rather than doing this through somebody which is going to cost me a greater return later on. And so I think that's a very interesting distinguishment that wasn't picked up, a nuance, if you would, but still very cool. And I think from the perspective of how it was announced, I think that the brands were clear about that. They didn't get into the equity part of it, but they were clear that it was an initial investment up to $4 billion. They didn't call it $4 billion.
Right.
The other thing that happened last week, which was interesting from the Amazon corner, and I'm gonna push this one into the Amazon world because it seems like Anthropic only talks when they have something to say. And good for you on that one, Anthropic people. But Amazon quietly, quote unquote, launched their basically developer apps for generative AI tools for businesses. I think it was on Friday last week. So first of all, Friday announcement, a little less leeway, a little less ramp room for them. So I don't think they really cared about dominating the hype cycle. It was more like, this is now available to you. And what it was a direct competitive play to GitHub, right, and Copilot. We know our competitors are offering these tools. We have our set of tools. If you're an AWS user, these are now tested, ready to deploy, and ready for you to play with. And again, very pragmatic, very much accessible now.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if some of that comes from Amazon's sort of traditional position as, I mean, all of these companies are 800-pound gorillas, but it almost seems like wherever Amazon plays, Amazon really, really, really dominates, right? They dominate e-commerce, they dominate, I mean, AWS, I believe, is the biggest of the cloud platforms, right?
By a mile.
By a long, right? And I wonder if they just kind of feel that confidence to stay out of the fray and just kind of stick to their knitting, do their stuff, announce things when they have it. And they know if you're on AWS, you're using our stuff. So we got to announce it. We got to stick it on the website. We got to get it into the trade press. But we don't need to have every, kind of Gen AI fanboy crowing about.
Yeah, they don't care.
Stuff. And it's not sexy stuff. I mean, the Anthropic investment is sexy, and as you say, look what happened there. People picked the top line of the potential.
So the biggest number ran.
Right. But when it comes to like the rollout of their enterprise tools, like it feels like their approach is much more sort of like the unsexy stuff, right? And there's nothing wrong with the unsexy stuff because that's the stuff that businesses are going to
that keeps their businesses on board
and are going to kind of they're going to integrate and they're gonna run with, and it's that stuff that has potentially the staying power, right? It's like the boring AI, not the cool AI, but you got to do
stuff that works.
Right,
Oh
it actually works, and you got to do it, and it delivers productivity. But it's not going to be the kind of thing you're reading at night, instead of pillow talk, right?
Right. There was one noticeable absence from the available now part of that, which brings us to our next story, which I'm going to segue. So both of you and I are thumbs up on that one, right?
Yeah, let's say we're thumbs up.
All right. So with the exception of the way it was reported, bad influencers. Read the story. Read the actual story. So the thing is Llama is not available on AWS. It was promised in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what's going on there. Like maybe that seemed like big tech versus big tech fighting and availability, or maybe they put some requirements into Llama to make sure that the quality was up to speed so they didn't break AWS, which would make sense to me on several levels based on what I know about Facebook. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess, if that's one, sort of crack in the sidewalk or whatever the right phrase is these days.
Maybe they didn't want to announce Llama availability. They were just like, yeah, we'll just throw this in there. Yeah, that's coming too.
Which also, I also wonder, when you think about two large tech companies making a bunch of announcements, and some of those announcements might in fact be joint, like the integration of Llama into Bedrock, or whatever they're calling their system. Is there also a factor where they're like, where Facebook or Meta is going, look, hey, we're announcing a bunch of stuff, hold off on that one for a couple of weeks, might have been a factor too, because of course our friends at Meta had quite a few announcements last week. I'm sure many people who were listening to this, may God have mercy on your souls for that.
Yes.
Also tuned in, or at least read the coverage of Meta's announcements. Zuck got on stage and announced a whole mess of things. And some of them were not directly related to artificial intelligence. He announced the new Quest 3, which is going to be augmented reality, not just virtual reality, with pass-through vision, which makes a lot of sense, of course. I don't know how successful Quest has been for them, but certainly it shows that he's, I guess, still committed to the metaverse, but perhaps his vision for what the metaverse is shifting a bit. It's less about sort of this immersive kind of walled off world, and maybe a little bit more about the integration of the digital and the physical on the real world, right? Which makes a lot more sense, which also relates to their Ray-Ban AI/AR glasses.
Oh, what the hell, man? Oh,
Like
my God.
we've seen that show before.
Hello, Google Glass. Oh, my God.
But I mean, and I can't imagine how that's going to work out. And AI, I think, is embedded to an extent in each of these things. But the core of their AI announcements really played to their announcement of essentially AI chatbots rolling out across the Facebook-owned platform. So WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger. So if it's a platform where you do messaging today, a Meta platform where you are messaging today, you will now have access to AI-driven chatbots. So there will be an assistant, sort of an AI assistant, where Zuckerberg says that he wants, to kind of provide you with an assistant who can help you do and be all you've ever hoped to be. Which I think is a little bit of kind of a bullshitty, kind of.
Can't imagine that from those guys.
That's where I go to WhatsApp to really be all I could ever hope to be. The availability of things like AI, sort of text to image stickers. Stickers apparently are still popular on some of these Meta platforms. I had no idea.
I know it's true with my kid.
So now you can, instead of using the stock stickers that are available through the system, you can say, a piece of toast with angel wings, and then, generate your own piece of toast with angel wings sticker, right? So we've got that kind of coming. And that's, I think, a function of what they're calling Meta AI. I don't know why it's not all Meta AI, but Meta AI, which I believe is their image generator, a la Midjourney or DALL-E. So you've got the ability to do sort of the high-res photo, realistic kind of stuff, but also the ability to do some of these kind of...
By the way, everybody's Instagram photos were used to train that shit.
Of course, that's another thing, right? That's another thing. All of a sudden, your Facebook shit posts, your crap about, your friend's birthday, your high school reunion photos, your kids' pictures, all that stuff that you're putting on Instagram and Facebook and
all comes
anywhere
else
now. All of a sudden, that's Mr. Zuckerberg's training data.
Right. It makes you feel really good about Meta's AI, and also you have to think about whatever Elon's doing too with his training data. It's like, oh, these two AI are going to be terrible.
Yeah, well, I know. Right, on like Dan Bongino's tweets. The other thing as part of this sort of their chatbot play is they've announced 20 some odd AI characters, some of which have celebrity tie-ins with celebrities, and I'm using celebrities, loosely because I'm including Charlie D'Amelio, but also Kendall Jenner, Mr. Beast, Snoop Dogg.
Does Kendall Jenner have a voice? Because I just see her going like this.
I know, yeah, I have no idea. It'll be the silent chatbot.
Strike a pose bot.
Stuff for me. But so
there's a lot of stuff, man.
They're rolling out a lot of stuff, but I think
it seems like a lot of this is recycled metaverse crap, like the voices, the personalities.
A lot of this, to me, the one of the big things I took away from it is that all of these things, yes, they have, they're using generative AI, but they're arguably components of a metaverse strategy.
Sure.
So he hasn't given up on metaverse, because that was the story, right?
Or he's trying to make it be used, right? Like, shit, I dropped $10 billion on this. I may as well use it.
Right.
Sunk cost.
Yeah, so there's I think these are across the board to me. These are metaverse announcements as much as they're AI announcements, which in an interesting way are maybe an inkling of the way these technologies ultimately one day potentially come together, right? Mm-hmm. Not in a big way right now, but potentially one day. And I think the other thing that's big for me is the extent to which these announcements are clearly in the consumer application space.
That's their business, right?
They're not trying to do that. Although I've heard rumors through the grapevine that they also intend to enter the productivity space in a big way. We'll see how that goes. But to me, this is the natural place for them to play. Not everybody doing Gen AI has to be all about B2B productivity.
And to that end, too, like if you look at how AWS got started, Amazon Wireless Service, or Web Services, sorry, the cloud, right? Amazon's cloud. AWS got started as a result of Amazon needing to host enough power to handle the holidays, right? And so then they had this incredible amount of computing capacity, and it was down like basically 48 weeks a year. So like, we may as well resell this capacity, and that's how AWS was born. I could easily see that happening with Meta and some of their AI engines where they get this down hard. And let's be honest here, man, these guys are really good at social networking. Like, look, Facebook should be dead. It should be dead. It's horrible. I mean, that's just an opinion. But, compared to other networks that are old like that, they're actually got some staying power. I would say X is diminishing. LinkedIn's had to reinvent itself several times, right? I don't really hear Pinterest talked about. Snap's had to reinvent itself several times, a couple times unsuccessfully. Right. It's hard to stick around. Facebook is still dominant.
Absolutely.
Instagram is still dominant. WhatsApp is still dominant. Threads was impressive this year. These guys get that game. So I think that kind of mass level social networking AI, to be able to license that for a company interested in something like that, hey, God forbid if Google or Apple were to partner with these guys in some way, like you could see sometimes these big tech players hate each other until they love each other.
Right.
And when they love each other, it works out great.
Yeah.
This is a licensable technology for people that want to have communities.
Yeah. It's also, every one of these, whether it's, Snoop Dogg or Charlie D'Amelio, right, doesn't make a difference, is also a pretty effective demo of sort of virtual influencer campaign possibilities, right?
Totally.
Because once you open this up to the Facebook developers now, bring your own influencer, bring your own talent deal. Here's how you do it for your brand. So, you bring your own J-Lo in and boom, you're going. Or I'm not going to be surprised if we start to see some of these chatbots that are already built, Mr. Beast, et cetera, being sold to advertisers and having brand messages integrated into those chats.
Sure. And it seems like that these celebrities, quote unquote, in Charlie D'Amelio's case, were obviously paid to do this.
Right.
And so I think that that runs contrary to the OpenAI model where everybody's content was just hacked. And so I think what Meta is doing is also very clever in that sense that they're getting out in front of this. If we're going to use your voice, we're going to pay for it. If you want to deploy your voice, you can. And we love you to do it because we want as many people using it as possible. But at the same time, that's your decision to make. We're not going to license. We're not going to pay for it.
Yeah.
So
I,
it's a really smart way to see that.
It is. I think there's not to get. I don't want to take us too far off track, and we're
at the end anyway.
In an hour anyway. But I think one of the sort of the dark side to something like this is, it kind of further blurs that line between the real world and the digital world, and where a teenage user of Instagram might already believe they have a relationship with Mr. Beast, right? Now all of a sudden they're talking to Mr. Beast, right? And that might feel very gratifying in the moment, but you almost wonder, when what how easy it is to make a chatbot, an LLM, hallucinate, to deliver false or misleading information, to potentially even be jailbroken into saying things it shouldn't say or whatever. When that happens, as it inevitably will at some point or another with one of these celebrity chatbots, and it has a negative effect on a teenager,
sure,
let's say, or an adult, it'll be interesting.
I know it had a negative effect on you. I know that you were talking about your conversations with Kendall already. I'm like,
right, exactly.
Okay, dude.
Oh, man, it's real. It's real. She loves me.
Yeah.
But
I did see a story about guys falling in love with AI bots.
100%. That's actually a huge thing now. And
yeah, it is. And they can't function in normal relationships because, God forbid, sometimes you don't get along, or if as you've been married a fair amount of time as well as I have, I mean, we're usually wrong even when we're right, and I know that. So I just know when to shut up. But if you're used to fighting with your AI bot against your will, you're not going to be able to function in a relationship,
right.
man.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how a lot of that stuff plays out. And again, it comes down to the same kind of things back in the day that, we thought we were doing nothing but good with social media. We were democratizing, communications for the masses and blah, blah, blah. And we didn't think about the downsides. People are at least thinking about the downsides. It's still a little bit disconcerting when Zuckerberg announced this stuff. He noted that there would be downsides and that there were some dangers, but none of these people are going, and therefore we will not. It's just going to be some problems, but hey, we just make this stuff.
Same slime bags, but thank God for Elon because we look less slimy.
Absolutely. Put on our backwards cowboy hat.
So hype or no hype? What do you think?
So, I mean, I would say it is hype to the extent that none of this stuff, to my knowledge, none of this stuff is available. Right? Yeah. Even the hardware, they're just taking pre-orders for the Quest. I have no idea what the reality is for these Ray-Ban glasses. I don't believe they really rolled out any of these celebrity chatbots yet. So they're certainly announcing things in advance, which is permissible, but they're definitely playing the hype cycle. I believe these things will be real.
Right? I mean, they have a track record of delivering. The question is whether it's good, always with that. Because a lot of the time it's not.
Right. That's another factor too.
Right. So wait and see. Jury's out.
Jury is out. All right, Mr. Livingston, how about a brainer?
Rather than assume that stories are factual, I think we're seeing once again, as the media world continues to devolve, that we have to get in, read the data, maybe even triangulate the data, or accept that this is a company saying something that's maybe not factual yet. But you really have to question everything now that's coming out of brands and look to see whether or not these things are actually available now and if it actually impacts you.
Yeah, and
that's my brainer.
You've led me into what I would have said would be my no-brainer, which is regardless of whether it's real, regardless of whether it's loud, regardless of whether everybody else is talking about it and calling it a superpower, at the end of the day, it comes down to what matters to you. You need to learn how to be critical in your thought and how to filter out the noise. You look at something like the Mistral announcement, which is really an announcement for developers or a release for developers, very different from the Facebook announcements, which are very much about new tools and toys for consumers to play with. And that ultimately will have implications for, let's say, a consumer brand marketer. Right?
Yes.
So if you're a B2B marketer, you probably don't care that there's going to be a Snoop Dogg chatbot on Instagram. But if you're a consumer brand marketer, you probably do, right? And you can start to think about what this could mean to you, right? Exactly. And neither of you as a marketer is going to particularly care about, some new developer grade LLM that's available through a torrent, right? So
right.
being sure,
but you might care about AWS if you're an AWS house.
Right. Absolutely. So in each of these cases, and in any case, it's smart to think about whether this really matters to me. Because I'll tell you this, I feel this way. I'm sure you feel this way, Geoff. I'm sure anybody who tries to do what we do in terms of keeping on top of the goings on in the AI market feels this way. If you were to stay on top of every single development, everything being announced every single day in this space, you would do nothing else.
Sure.
You'd be like you're sort of like, this kind of like immobile sort of gelatinous mass, like who never moves out of a chair, just trying to keep on top. You'd have no family, no friends, no work, right? So you can't stay on top of it all. So you need to get very good at making quick, I wouldn't say snap, but quick, informed decisions about whether something is worth your attention and your time. Because you will have to dive into the things that are worth your attention and time. You'll need to play with them, try them, experiment, put your hands on the keyboards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can't do that everywhere. And the worst thing is you do nothing. You just read the news and do nothing. Or you try to do everything. So, really getting good at making a quick, determined decision. Does this matter to me? Is like the ultimate no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, or brainer, depending on how you think about it. So I would say that's what I've got.
I think you really need a domain filter, right? Like you really have to this is what we care about. This is what we do within our job. If it's not in that, I don't want to hear about it.
Absolutely. All right. I think that's enough rambling for today.
All right. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to the No Brainer Podcast, episode 16, which I think I fondly believe is all about fact or fiction AI announcements, a true breakdown of the hype cycle. And with that in mind, please click like if you enjoyed the episode. If you want to give us feedback and tell us we stink, we're ready to hear it. Do it via the nobrainerpodcast.com website. And of course, we really, really enjoy reviews. We prefer that you post them publicly even. Share it with your friends. Tell everybody about the podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, do rate us. We do really, really appreciate it. It really does help get the word out. And most importantly, enjoy this beautiful autumn weather. Thank you. And thank you, Greg.
Thank you.